We're already a month into the NFL season. It's crazy to say that already, but we're here today to close off of Week 4, and we're going to open up Week 5 with some updated power rankings. Stay tuned for that. As always, timestamps will be in the description of the video. But if you like sports podcasts, we're on the road to 1K. We drop 4 videos a week, so if you enjoyed any point, support us on the road to that milestone. But without further ado, this is the Anomaly Podcast. It's Owen. Let's start off with a quick little recap. Alright, on your screen now, we're going to take a look at last Tuesday's top 10. Of course, heading into this prior week of football. Each and every Tuesday, if you guys didn't know, we're going to be dropping our updated top 10 teams going into that next week, as well as have our players of the week. So, when we take a look at last week, we had San Fran, Philly, Miami, KC, and Detroit in our top 5. 6 through 10 was Dallas, Buffalo, Baltimore, the Cleveland Browns, who unfortunately will leave this list for some unfortunate reasons, and the Green Bay Packers at number 10, sneaking into that list because they've shown a lot of promise. But like I mentioned with the Browns, the Packers and the Browns both suffered losses this week. They both fall out of the top 10. One lost a game more so than the other. Regardless, both of those teams have fell out of the list, still in the realm, in the bubble, I guess is the way to put it, to jump back into it here in the coming weeks. But some teams that are right outside, some teams that I was really battling with for the 9 and 10 spots of this list, it was the LA Chargers and the LA Rams. I guess it's a party there in Los Angeles. But with the Rams, unfortunately, we have to wait on the health update for Matthew Stafford. But Matthew Stafford did it again. I mean, he might be the greatest quarterback when it comes to playing through injuries. As he showed last week, he did it yet again. And the Chargers, they're starting to roll, at least a little bit here, as Justin Herbert's starting to pick it up. Both of these teams, you can make the argument that they could be 9, 10, or heck, even higher than that. But for me, they are right outside with definitely a big win or two on the way. They could find their way into the list. But at number 10, I did go with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And this is a Bucs team that has been the underdog all season. And they might be led by the biggest underdog of them all in Baker Mayfield. And look, as a Browns fan, I was never a big Baker fan. I said to my family, if we draft Baker Mayfield, I don't want to be a Browns fan anymore. So obviously I was not the biggest Baker fan. But even with that said, I also have said on this podcast here that this season with the Bucs was going to be his best season of his career. And at least a month into the year, he's shown that. And I'm happy for Baker Mayfield that he's striving and succeeding elsewhere other than Cleveland. But this is a Tampa Bay team that has looked solid on both sides of the ball. They have good wins over the Vikings, the Bears, and the New Orleans Saints, who were undefeated into that last week. Tampa Bay has looked really good to start the year on both sides of the ball, like I mentioned, and they finally cracked my top 10. I hopefully, like other teams here that have come into the top 10 and fell out very quickly, hopefully Tampa can stay for the foreseeable future. At my number 9, we're going to have the Seattle Seahawks. And it all starts with their quarterback. Geno Smith has been a completely different player with the Seattle Seahawks compared with the New York Jets and other organizations. And he's up there with Matthew Stafford as far as the toughness that he showed from last week. As he got injured early in that game, but he came back and he won that game in convincing fashion. Not to mention, this is slowly becoming one of the best offenses in the NFL. With Geno Smith, with Ken Walker, and DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, JSN hasn't looked the greatest, but he's also shown flashes early in the year. This offense is on the horizon, and even if Geno Smith doesn't have the best night, this team has still managed to win games. For example, yesterday night, there against the Giants, as yesterday was a game led by the defense, mainly the rookie, Devin Witherspoon, my favorite corner coming into the draft class, as noted on this podcast. He broke out in a huge way, no doubt about it. He had a pair of sacks. He had a 97 or 98 yard pick six. Absolutely insane performance from the rookie there, especially at the cornerback position. The Seahawks defense in general, though, they also had 11 total sacks as a team, and they only allowed 3 points. So this team, if they, I'll put it this way. 3 straight wins for Seattle after that rocky week 1. If they can add a defense anything near from what they played like on Monday night to this already elite offense, this is a Seattle team that is going to be dangerous moving forward, and they could compete with a number of teams ahead of them. At my number 8 spot, we're going to have a stagnant team here, the Baltimore Ravens. Look, credit to the Ravens for beating the opponent that was in front of them last week. But we didn't really learn much from this Ravens team in that game, as defensively they were facing a rookie 5th-round quarterback who was a last-minute replacement for Deshaun Watson. Clearly, DTR was not ready for the field, at least at the professional level. And then offensively, they did put up 28 points against maybe the best defense in the league in the Cleveland Browns. However, it's easier to do that when the opposing team has no offenses, and they go 3 and out every time, and the defense of that team is on the field for 30 minutes, or 35 plus minutes, or whatever it was. Again, credit to them for doing their job. They handled their business, they won their game, and they looked okay in doing so, but they just haven't had that convincing win over a very complete team yet, as they've had wins over the first, I guess they do have a win over the Texans, which might be their best win on the season. However, that was CJ Stroud's first game. Then they have a win over the banged-up Browns and the Bengals. They stay in the top 10 because they are taking care of their business. They just haven't had that statement victory yet. I'm looking for that victory, but the Ravens, I'm going to show them their flowers. No pun intended, but they are still a top 10 team here in the NFL, at least a month into the year. At my number 7 spot, we're going to have our biggest drop, I think, of the year. If I'm not mistaken, maybe the Bengals might top that with how much they fell off in these rankings. But the Miami Dolphins, they dropped 4 spots in the rankings, as it was a reality check. And now it's the easiest way to describe their loss last week against the Buffalo Bills. Because after putting up 70 points in 60 minutes of game against the Broncos last week, or 2 weeks ago, they put up just 6 points over the last 43 minutes of last week's game against the Buffalo Bills. Don't get me wrong, this offense you can argue even looked good in the first quarter of that game. At the very least, they looked good for the first 2 drives of that game last week against Buffalo. But then Buffalo adjusted and Miami stayed stagnant. They did not adjust to the adjustments of Buffalo, and the game got away from them. Granted, Miami did have some key injuries to their offensive line, to Connor Williams, to Teron Armstead. On the defensive side of the ball, they didn't have Jalen Phillips or Jalen Ramsey still. So granted, they do have some key injuries there, but I don't know. I don't know even if those guys stayed healthy, if that would have made a big difference with how much Buffalo looked better than them last week. I think this team's going to be fine. I think they just had this reality check, kind of got brought back down to earth a little bit, and they will need this defense to come around. I will say that. They need this defense with Vic Fangio to come around, but at the same time, when Jalen Ramsey comes back, a lot of those problems will be fixed on the back end of their defense. Miami's going to be fine. I'll put it that way. They have quality wins over the Chargers, the Broncos, of course, and the Patriots. They're going to be fine offensively. Defensively needs to come around a little bit, but with how bad they looked against a competent opponent last week, not named the Chargers, they drop a couple spots in these rankings. And also a big part of that is that these top 6 teams did look really good last week. At number 6, though, we're going to have another stagnant team, the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys were embarrassed, is a good way to put it, after their loss to the Joshua Dobbs-led Arizona Cardinals. And they took it personal. Put the MJ picture on the screen. They took it personal, and they took it all out on the New England Patriots just a day or 2 ago, as they added 2 more defensive touchdowns to their stats this season, and they won 38-3 in a dominant fashion. And that is a 108-13 margin in their 3 wins this year over the Jets, Giants, and Patriots. It's the same song and dance, though, for me every year for Dallas. They have the talent. Can they put it together? That's the question. And we'll find that out pretty soon here, as next week they play the San Francisco 49ers, who have won 14 straight regular season games, and we'll talk about them later. But it's going to be a primetime game next week against a very hot San Francisco team, a team that's been at the top of my rankings for a couple weeks now. We'll have to see here in a minute if they still are, but the Cowboys, big game next week. They have the talent. Can they continue to roll against competent opponents? Before we get into the second half of the list, I do want to shout out to today's sponsor, Life by Laura. This is a company that reached out to me about 2 months ago. She said, hey, do you want a custom tumbler with your custom logo on it? I said, sure. She sent that out to me in, I think, a day or 2. So quick service. She sent it out to me, and I've been using this cup each and every day since. Whether it feels like a coffee in the morning or an energy drink in the afternoon. I know I have a caffeine addiction. The insulation in this cup is amazing despite if it's a hot or cold product, and that's just the start of it for Life by Laura. As if you check out our websites at Facebook Life by Laura or Instagram at Life by Laura 2023, which you see on your screen, she does a lot of other custom projects, whether it's t-shirts, tumblers, crafts. I know she's doing some Halloween custom bags here pretty soon as Halloween's right around the corner. So go ahead and check out her pages to look at her past projects or shoot her a DM. Say, hey, can you do this? Discuss a future project with her. I'm sure you guys can come up with some magic. But Life by Laura, shout out to today's sponsor as a longtime sponsor of the channel, and I couldn't be more grateful. To kick off the second half of the list, or the top 5, is a better way to put it, we're going to have the Buffalo Bills. They jump up 2 spots in my rankings after a dominant win against a really hot Miami Dolphins team last week. But not only has this team won 3 straight games, but they've outscored their opponents 123-33 in that stretch. That is a 90-point plus in Buffalo's favor. The most notable win, of course, was last week against Miami, as we kind of talked about it, but let's resurface as we're now on the Bills side of things. They shut down an offense who put up 70 points just a week prior to their matchup, and they shut down this offense in style, as they shut down Tyreek and Tua. Tyreek had an off day, and Tua was sacked 5 or 6 times, couldn't do much on offense. He could never get in rhythm, in all honesty. Then they shut down this much improved run game of the Miami Dolphins. So Devon Achane, sure, he had 2 touchdowns, but it was not in the fashion that he had just a week prior. Not to mention on offense, Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs. I mean, Josh Allen had a perfect passer rating, arguably the player of the week. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Stephon Diggs also in that conversation. Both of those guys had a monstrous week, absolutely murdered this Dolphins defense. They have a big matchup, the Buffalo Bills were saying. Big matchup in London next week in Jacksonville's secondary hometown. It's going to be a big game for both teams, and I really want to see if Buffalo can keep this momentum rolling to really look as dominant as they have, because they're not even at full strength, and they are a top 5 team in ball. Don't forget Von Miller styles to come back. At number 4, Detroit Lions. The Lions, they are starting to look the part of their name as they're dominating in the trenches on both sides of the ball. They are quite literally playing Dan Campbell ball, a tough-nosed, ankle-biting, kneecap-breaking, trench warfare style of play. Not to mention, they have 4 starting rookies in their lineup, surrounded by veterans, that are making valuable winning effort plays each and every week. And this roster is led by a quarterback by the name of Jared Goff, who's having a career year. With quality wins this year over the reigning defending Super Bowl champs in the Chiefs, the Atlanta Falcons, and the Green Bay Packers, 3 teams that could each and every week have been in this top 10, everything seems to be coming together for Detroit at this point in time. As coming into the year, they had a lot of hype. They got a big win to open the year. Then they got humbled in week 2 against the Seattle Seahawks, but they've gotten back on track. 3-1, leaders of their division, and they look, like I said, everything is coming together on both sides of the ball. Aiden Hutchinson is in the DPOW conversations as a second-year player. Absolutely insane. They should be able to keep it rolling next week at home versus Carolina to improve to 4-1. But then after that, they have some tougher games down the stretch. But Detroit, for now, top 4 team in the league. It's a crazy world we live in where they're a top 4 team in the league. Moving into the top 3, we're going to start here with the reigning, defending Super Bowl champions, in my best Paul Heyman impersonation, the Kansas City Chiefs, as they've continued to win games off of last year, but they have yet this year to look dominant, aside from that Bears game. As the most recent example, I mean, they almost blew a 17-0 lead against the Jets, while also making Zach Wilson look like he was deserving of that number 2 overall pick just a few years ago. The offensive line and the wide receiver groups on the offensive side of the ball also worry me, as Patrick Mahomes has had to use his legs a lot more this year than other years, and it's just a cause for concern when you start to play these contender level teams that we'll see here in a couple weeks. Overall, I think it's never going to look too bad when you have Andy Reid and you have Pat Mahomes on the same team. This team's going to win games and they're going to win at a high level, but there is cause for concern long term if they can't sharpen some things up offensively and defensively going forward. But no doubt, they've done this every year. They can get back on the right track, but how soon is that going to happen? At number 2, no shocker here. We're going to have the same two teams, the only two unbeaten teams left here in the NFL. But the Philadelphia Eagles, they've had relatively unimpressive one-score win games against the Patriots, Vikings, and now Commanders. Even with that said, though, again, the goal of football and the goal of professional sports is to win the game. The Eagles have done that and to perfection. They are 4-0, and they've won each and every game despite having ugly wins, quote-unquote. But they've surprisingly struggled to find their identity early in the year. But there's no doubt in my mind, this team is still the most complete team in football, and I'm sure they can figure something out going forward. And I will say that they have to relatively soon as far as finding their identity, as 3 of their next 4 games are on the road, and the one home game they have in this next month of play is against the Miami Dolphins, who still have one of the most explosive offenses in the NFL. Their early November, their November slate and their early December slate is also brutal following this month on the road, as they have a stretch starting in November to early December where their schedule goes Dallas, Kansas City, Buffalo, San Fran, and then Dallas yet again. All 5 of those teams are on this top 10 and in the top 6. Absolutely insane schedule there for the Philadelphia Eagles. So I guess it's safe to say we're going to find out who this team really is over the next month and a half of ball. But there will be time to fade these Eagles, and to drop them down these rankings if they don't continue to improve and win these games. But for now, they're 4-0. They deserve to be top 2 because they keep winning. At number 1, though, we're going to close off this list with the San Francisco 49ers. The best way to explain them this year is that they look controlled and they look composed in all 4 commanding weeks, all 4 commanding wins. They have shown all signs to be a Super Bowl contender, a real Super Bowl contender early on in the year. And 3 straight weeks, they've been at number 1 here for me on these top 10 rankings. Don't get me wrong, their wins haven't been really anything to write home about. When you have wins over the Steelers, the Rams, the Giants, and the Cardinals. But they have looked complete and they have looked dominant on both sides of the ball. And next week, they have Dallas on primetime on Sunday night. And that's going to be their first big test of the year. Just like Philly, this is a San Francisco team that has a tough stretch for the next month or so of football. So we're going to have to see who they really are over this next month or so. But for now, they'll stay at number 1. Big matchup next week against the Dallas Cowboys. But that is going to do it for our Week 5, pre-Week 5 top 10 rankings. As, again, we have 2 teams that entered the rankings in the Seahawks and the Tampa Bay Bucks. It seems like nobody can ever stay stagnant at that 9 and 10 spot. But then the top 8 stayed same, just some flipping flopping around the rankings. The biggest dropper is the Dolphins. The biggest riser is the Buffalo Bills. But that is going to do it for our Week 5 rankings. Moving over to our Players of the Week. Of course, this is from last week's games, the Week 4 outings. And the Offensive Player of the Week, it could be no one else than CMC, as 7 receptions, 177 total yards through the air and the ground. He had 4 touchdowns in this game, 2 on the ground, 2 receiving, in typical Christian McCaffrey fashion. And he also had maybe the best hurdle I've ever seen, at least in a long time. He had one amazing hurdle there against the rookie corner for Arizona. CMC did it all, in a game where Deebo Samuel put up 3 rush attempts for 6 total yards as their supposedly number 1 wide receiver. And in a game where George Kittle had 1 reception for 9 yards. That is 2 of your key offensive players that had a total of 15 yards in a game on 4 total touches. They did not contribute to this game and to this win, at least not to the level of Christian McCaffrey. Brandon Ayuk deserves his flowers, I will say that, so shout out to Brandon Ayuk in his return. But McCaffrey really did everything, and he picked up the slack for a cast around him, at least of receiving options, that didn't do much aside from Ayuk. So McCaffrey, shout out to him, as again, one amazing hurdle is the reason I gave him this award, but also the 4 total touchdowns. Some honorable mentions here, though. We have Josh Allen, who had 330-plus yards, a perfect passer rating, 5 total touchdowns, a very big win there for Buffalo as far as the legitimacy of their team. A.J. Brown, a guy who had 9 receptions, 180 yards, and 2 touchdowns. 2 good back-to-back weeks for A.J. Brown after a slow start to the season. Another guy I want to talk about here is CJ Stroud. 320 plus yards, 2 touchdowns, and not to mention a historic start to the season, as I think there was a stat that said there's been no quarterback in NFL history with a better first month of their career than Cam Newton. So CJ Stroud has no interceptions, something that no quarterback has ever done in their NFL careers so far a month into the NFL season. So no interceptions, that's an NFL record so far at this point in the season for CJ Stroud. And not to mention, I mean, he's had a better start than every other quarterback but Cam Newton to this point in their careers. So CJ Stroud is definitely worthy of that number 2 pick, and he's looked dominant at times this year. And honestly, I might have been wrong about CJ Stroud this offseason. I said he would be good. I just didn't think he'd be the best quarterback in the class. And now he kind of makes me look stupid a month into the NFL year. And then Lamar Jackson, I want to show love to him. Again, playing a depleted Browns team is the way to put it. But he still had 210 yards, 4 touchdowns. I think 3 of them were on the ground. He looked dominant as always. He looked like Lamar Jackson. Some other guys here. Nico Collins had a bounce back week. Stephon Diggs, if you want me to show him some love, tune into tomorrow's fantasy football episode. We'll talk about Stephon Diggs. Puka Nacua, the most receptions throughout a month in NFL history. He's setting records each and every week. Shout out to the undrafted, or I guess the unknown guy coming into the year. Mark Andrews, that's another guy. Justin Herbert, Brandon Ayuk, some other guys I've already mentioned. All of those guys deserve their flowers, just none more than Christian McCaffrey this week. At the Defensive Player of the Week, I'm going to give it to Khalil Mack. There's no other guy I could have went to. I didn't even write down honorable mentions. But now I think of it, Devon Witherspoon should have definitely been an honorable mention. But Khalil Mack, when he put up 6 sacks, this is the second 5+ sack game of his career. He was 1 sack away from breaking the NFL record, of course, against his old team there in the Oakland Raiders. Well, I guess now Las Vegas Raiders. And then he also had 8 or so tackles. So Khalil Mack looked absolutely dominant. It was definitely a nostalgic game there from Khalil Mack. But against his old team, it's just the icing on the cake there for why he decided to have that kind of week against his former team. But that's really going to do it for today's show. We ran through our top 10. We ran through our top 10 rankings, the teams that fell out, the teams that joined, and of course we finished off the list. As you guys saw, we ran through some players of the week. And tomorrow, I will let you guys know we are going to be going through week 4 or week 5 fantasy football waivers. So if you guys are stuck, or if you guys are 0-2, or if you guys are 0-4 to this point, or 1-3, you're struggling in fantasy football, we've been giving out league-winning advice every single Wednesday and Friday. So if you guys want to tune into the channel then, that would be greatly appreciated. And then on Thursday, every single Thursday, we give out our weekly predictions for the games. If you guys need any reason to tune in, it's on your screen now. Last week, we were 13-3. Of course, that's around an 81% correct rate. And on the season, we're guessing the games at about 72% correct rate. So if you guys need any reason to tune into my Thursday shows, look, I'm not the smartest guy out there. I'm not the the guy that knows every single line in Vegas. I know how to pick these games, at least at the bare minimum. So if you guys want to tune in every Thursday, we've been hot lately, and man, it looks like we predict almost every game right, at least for the most part. But that is going to do it for today's show. We'll see you guys tomorrow for some fantasy football, and the rest of the week for some amazing content. Again, we're on the road to 1,000 subs on the channel. So if you guys enjoyed it at any point, or if you're still here, thank you. But subscribe to the channel. I mean, obviously you enjoyed at least a little bit. So help us on the road to that next big milestone. But without further ado, we'll see you guys tomorrow for some fantasy football. Until then, stay happy, stay healthy. I'm out.